This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. I stood in front of the house, my hands clenched into fists. This was it, the place where it all began, the place where I had been kicked out like I was a nothing, just because I dared to make my own choices. My parents' house, the one they had thrown me out of years ago, now belonged to me. I rang the doorbell, my pulse steady despite the storm raging in my chest. The door opened and my father stood there, his face etched with time but still carrying the same disapproving look I had grown up with. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tinged with impatience. I let a slow smile spread across my lips. "Yes, you can. I'm your landlord now." His brows knitted in confusion, then disbelief. "What are you talking about?" My mother appeared behind him, her eyes widening as she recognized me. "Jake?" I nodded, stepping inside uninvited, letting my eyes roam around the living room. It hadn't changed much. The same old beige couch, the coffee table cluttered with magazines, the faint smell of my mother's overcooked meatloaf still lingering in the air. "I bought the house," I said casually, like I was mentioning the weather. "So we need to discuss the new rent. It's tripling." My father's face turned red. "You're joking." I shrugged. "I'm dead serious. Property values have gone up, and I need a fair return on my investment. You can either pay the new rent or move out. Up to you." My mother gasped. "Jake, you know we can't afford that." "That's not my problem," I said, my voice calm but firm. They had given me 24 hours to pack and leave. I was giving them the same choice. Fair was fair. But as I walked out of the house, leaving them frozen in shock, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting even. This was about something much bigger. This was about taking back control of my life. 4 years earlier, I was a broke college student living under the thumb of two overbearing parents. They had mapped out my life before I even had a say in it. I was supposed to get my business degree, join some corporate firm, and make them proud. But I didn't want that. I wanted to be a programmer. I had spent years coding in my spare time, losing myself in algorithms and problem solving. It was the only thing that ever felt right. But to them, it was a childish hobby, not a real career. The night I told them I was switching my major, I knew it would go badly. At dinner, I pushed my food around my plate, my heart hammering in my chest. Finally, I set down my fork and took a deep breath. "I'm changing my major to computer science." Silence. Then my father slammed his fork against the table. "Are you out of your damn mind?" "Business makes money, Jake," my mother added, shaking her head. "Computer science? You'll end up broken, jobless." "I like it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "and I think I can do well in it." "Thinking has never been your strong suit," my mother muttered under her breath. My face burned, but I held my ground. "This is my decision." My father leaned forward, his expression hard. "Fine. You want to make adult decisions? Then act like an adult. If you're so independent, you can get the hell out of my house. You have 24 hours. I thought he was bluffing. He wasn't. The next day, I packed my life into a single duffel bag and walked out the door. They didn't even say goodbye. Mike, my best friend since high school, let me crash on his couch in his tiny apartment. It smelled like stale pizza and gym socks, but it was better than the streets. "You okay, man?" he asked that night. I let out a bitter laugh. "Not really." "They're assholes," what he muttered, "but you're going to get through this." I wasn't so sure. The next few weeks were brutal. I worked at a grocery store part-time, but it wasn't enough to pay rent. I tried to juggle work and school, but exhaustion hit me like a truck. I was drowning and no one was throwing me a life raft. Ashley, my girlfriend, tried to keep me sane. She took me out for cheap sandwiches when I couldn't afford real meals. She held my hand when I wanted to quit. "You're stronger than this," she told me one night. "I know it feels impossible now, but you'll figure it out." But all I felt was hopelessness. I couldn't keep up with school. My grades slipped. My savings dried up. The day I dropped out of college, I felt like the biggest failure on the planet. I had dreamed of being the first in my family to graduate. Now that dream was gone. "You didn't fail," Ashley insisted. "You just hit a detour." But it didn't feel like a detour. It felt like the end. I started working full-time at a rundown diner, flipping burgers and mopping floors. It was hell, but at least it paid something. One night, while I was taking my break, a guy at the counter saw me working on my laptop. "You into coding?" he asked. I nodded. "Self-taught." He handed me his card. "My company needs entry-level lit people. Send me your resume." I barely dared to hope, but I sent it. A week later, I got the interview. I walked into that office with borrowed clothes and a pounding heart. Tina, my future boss, grilled me hard. But when she asked me to fix a bug on the spot, my hand stopped shaking. This, this was what I was good at. "You've got potential," she said. "Let's see what you can do." I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked like a madman, learning everything I could. I took on extra projects, stayed late, and pushed myself harder than ever before. Years passed, I climbed the ranks, I built my own company. I made a name for myself. And then one day I saw the house, my parents' house, the one they had thrown me out of, for sale. They had fallen on hard times. They had no idea I was successful now. No idea I had the money to buy it. So I did. My father clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. My mother still looked like she was processing what was happening, her lips trembling as if she was about to say something but couldn't find the words. "You can't do this," my father finally said, his voice lower now, like he was trying to keep himself under control. I chuckled, shaking my head. "I can, actually, and I already did." He stepped forward, his chest puffing out like he was still the one in charge, still the man who had power over me. "This is our home." "Was your home," I corrected, my tone unwavering. "You sold it. It belongs to me now, legally." My mother took a shaky breath. "Jake, listen, we were harsh on you back then, but..." "Harsh?" I laughed bitterly. "You threw me out like garbage because I didn't want to be your puppet. You didn't just kick me out, you made sure I had nowhere to go. And now you expect me to care?" "We were trying to teach you responsibility," my father said, his voice growing defensive. "You were being reckless. We wanted you to..." "No," I cut him off. "You wanted control. You wanted a puppet, not a son. And now that you've lost that control, you suddenly want to talk about fairness?" He clenched his jaw tighter. "You want to stay?" "Fine," I continued. "Pay the new rent." My mother let out a small, desperate laugh, as if I was joking. "Jake, we can't afford that. You know we can't." "Not my problem," I replied smoothly. "You said it yourselves. I needed to be responsible for myself." "Well, now so do you." She turned to my father, her voice trembling. "Tom, say something." My father looked at me with barely contained rage, his hands shaking, but I saw something else behind his fury, something he had never shown before. Fear. They had no options, no safety net, and for the first time in their lives, no control. "You smug little bastard," he hissed. I grinned. "You really thought I'd fail, didn't you?" He didn't answer, but his silence said everything. "You thought I'd come crawling back, begging for help, that I'd prove you right." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "But guess what? I built something better than you ever did. While you were busy tearing me down, I was busy making something of myself." I watched as my words landed, the way my mother's lips quivered, the way my father's nostrils flared as he swallowed his pride, but couldn't hide the humiliation in his eyes. "You have 1 month," I said simply. "Either pay the new rent or leave." My father let out a sharp breath, his face contorted with rage. "This is revenge, isn't it?" I tilted my head. "You think that, but it's not. If it was revenge, I'd be throwing you out right now with nothing but a duffel bag and a good luck, just like you did to me. But I'm giving you a choice, something you never gave me." The words hung heavy in the air. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head in disbelief. "Jake, please." "Good luck," I said, repeating my father's exact words from years ago before turning to leave. I walked out of that house, feeling the weight of years of anger and pain finally lifting. But as I reached my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Ashley's name. I answered, my voice calm, steady. "It's done." "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I exhaled, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror, like I just won a war. But the war wasn't over yet. A week later, I got a call from the property manager. "Mr. Carter, we have a situation with the tenants in your property." I leaned back in my office chair, already knowing where this was going. "Let me guess. They can't pay and they want an extension?" "Not exactly," the manager hesitated. "They haven't been responding to calls or emails. And according to the neighbors, there have been some disturbances." I frowned. "What kind of disturbances?" "Shouting, broken furniture. Your father, apparently had an altercation with someone outside the house last night. A heated argument. The police were called, but no one was arrested." I rubbed my temple. Of course. My father had never been the type to take things lying down. "Do a house check," I said, "and I'll be there soon." When I pulled up to the house, I saw my father standing on the front porch, pacing, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. He never smoked before. He turned when he saw me, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. "You happy now?" he snapped. I crossed my arms. "You tell me. Still planning on paying, or should I get the eviction papers ready?" "You're really gonna throw your own parents out?" he sneered. I stared at him unimpressed. "You did it to me first. Don't act like you're the victim now." He scoffed but didn't have a comeback. I sighed, rubbing my jaw. "Look, you want to stay? Figure it out. Get a job, find help, do whatever you need to do. But the rent isn't changing." My mother came out of the house then, her face pale, her hands wringing together. "We have nowhere to go, Jake," she whispered. I looked at her, my chest tightening slightly, but I wouldn't bend. "Not my problem," I said again, but the words tasted different this time. I turned to leave, my father's voice following me. "You're just like me," he called out. I stopped. "You think you're better, but you're not. You just got power now, and you're using it the same way I did." I didn't turn back, but his words stayed with me longer than I wanted them to. A week passed, and the silence from the house was almost unsettling. No calls, no emails, nothing. It wasn't like my parents to stay quiet, especially not my father. Then one evening I got a call, not from the property manager this time, but from my mother. I hesitated before answering. "Jake," her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Can you come over? Just for a moment?" Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. When I pulled up to the house, the front door was slightly open. Inside, it was different. My father sat slumped in an old chair, staring at the floor. There were papers scattered around, bills, overdue notices. The weight of the situation had finally sunk in. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "I spent my whole life thinking I was the one in control," he murmured. "Always believed that if I pushed hard enough, I could make people do what I wanted. That if I set rules, people had to follow them." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Turns out, life doesn't work like that." I didn't say anything. I let him talk. "You're right, Jake," he admitted after a moment. "We threw you out because we were afraid. Afraid that if you didn't follow our plan, you'd fail. And if you failed, it meant we failed as parents." He exhaled sharply. "But the truth is, you didn't fail. We did." I clenched my jaw, my chest tight. I had spent years waiting for these words, but now that they were here, I didn't know how to feel. "I was so focused on making sure you lived life the way I thought was best, I didn't see you were already figuring it out on your own," he continued. "And when I lost control over you, I didn't know how to handle it." He looked up at me, his face older than I remembered. "And now we've lost everything because we spent too long believing we were untouchable." I swallowed hard. My mother sat next to him, eyes glassy. "We were wrong, Jake, about so many things, but mostly about you." For the first time in years, I saw something in them I never thought I would. Humility. I took a slow breath. "I can't undo the past," I said, "but I also don't want to become the same person you were to me." My father's brows furrowed slightly. "You said I was just like you," I continued, "and for a while I hated that idea. But maybe you're right. Maybe I did take power and see it against you. But that's not who I want to be." They watched me in silence. "So here's the deal," I said finally. "You're not getting special treatment. The rent stays where it is, but," I sighed, "if you can't afford it, I'll give you some time." Not because I owe you, but because it's the right thing to do. My father studied me carefully, as if trying to understand where this version of me had come from. Then, to my surprise, he gave a small, tired nod. Fair enough. It wasn't an apology wrapped in flowers. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it was something. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. As I walked away from that house for the last time, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving a point. It was about reclaiming control over my life, about choosing who I wanted to be instead of letting the past define me. For years, I carried the weight of resentment, of feeling abandoned and undervalued. But standing there, seeing my father finally acknowledge his mistakes, I understood that sometimes the real victory isn't in proving someone wrong. It's in proving yourself right. Life has a way of coming full circle. The people who doubted you, who underestimated you, may one day find themselves facing the reality of their own choices. And in that moment, you get to decide what kind of person you want to be. So I chose to be better, not for them, but for me. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight against expectations placed on you? Have you ever had to prove yourself to the very people who didn't believe in you? How did it shape you? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. And remember, your path is yours to create. Never let anyone take that away from you.